Welcome back, my friend Tony Gosling. How are you?
Fine. Hi, Richie.
Good to have you on, buddy. Thank you for the heads up. No, I was just reminiscing there about getting in touch with you back in 2010 when I was on the radio in Spain, and you were talking about Bilderberg, and I knew very little about these things. I still know very little about most things. And I rang you up, and there you were. There you are. We've been conversing ever since. We've had a few ding-dongs, a few good old Barneys, but I love having you on, pal. I love that you're always there. And thanks for coming back. We will talk about property ownership and stuff and all of that. We got plenty of time between now and the top of the hour. But Bilderberg is back. And it's back where, T? Where is it going to be this year?
Madrid. So it's at a swanky hotel. Sierra, can't remember exactly the name of it, but anyway, you'll find it. It's the poshest hotel, pretty much. Well, what we always do is if we can locate the actual the city it's going to be in, which is which Hannah and Charlie and this Hannah and Charlie Skelton. And also this time there's a Swedish journalist that's dug it out from Freedom of Information requests in Sweden. Once you've figured out where and when it's going to be, which is, that is through Freedom of Information and things like that, easier generally. But then you have to go and just go around on the various hotel booking sites to figure out which 5-star hotel is booked for those days. But the question is, who are these people? What are these people? Why is this interesting? And I first got onto this it's a long time ago now, nearly 30 years, 1996, when I saw a list of the people who were there at this meeting, which I'd never heard of. And I look through the list, and as I'm going down the list, you've got royalty, you've got the people who are the general managers and owners of the big media companies. You've got the top. At the time, it was investment banks. Now, really, you're now looking at private equity firms. So the landscape's changed a bit. The oil companies were all there. The early days of media has branched out now, of course, into social media, and they've taken over that zone because everyone has kind of migrated to social media because the mainstream media is so diabolical. And so that's what really shocked me initially was why the hell is this been so secret? And then over the years, I've slowly but surely made all the connections with NATO and realised that really this was set up after World War II to make sure that the financial elite and these elitists control who gets into politics in the NATO countries, and I think today they pretty much got it stitched up. We've got this. They have. We've got this farcical general election coming along in Britain where Rishi Sunak has been sabotaging the Conservative Party in a very vicious manner. Anyone that's trying to get some sort of leadership election finds their car crashing or, actually a blackmail sting against them, things like this happening. And so, Sunak is in league with the deep state, Goldman Sachs, financial elite, in order to completely destroy the Tory party's chances of, and he's got to do that because otherwise Starmer wouldn't be able to win. And so Starmer's in the situation where he just has to stand there and do nothing. Talk a few, plainly, just real, anything. He can say anything.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And he will win the election. I just found out the other day from Ronnie Barkan, who's one of the Palestine Action guys. I managed to get an interview with him eventually after a few months of trying last week. And Ronnie explained to him that it was actually it was Keir Starmer, whilst he was director of the public prosecutions, that made sure that in league with Ken Clarke, who was Justice Secretary, I think this is around 2011, there was attempts to prosecute or to take out arrest warrants for Israeli war criminals, particularly, but also potentially even Tony Blair, right, in London for war crimes. And it was Starmer that made sure that these went nowhere as the Director of Public Prosecutions. And then Ken Clarke, who's the main representative of the Bilderbergers in the UK at the time. I don't think he's kind of pretty much retired now. And who actually got the law changed. So now there is no possibility of issuing arrest warrants in the UK for war criminals. And of course, so it makes London a kind of place that. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is these people are in charge now. After it's 70 years or so of since the 1950s of pressure to control who is allowed and who is not allowed to be a politician in the West, particularly senior politicians. They're now running the show, Richie, as far as I can see.
Rendering something I've suspected for a long time, and now I'm convinced of it, rendering general elections as worthless in the extreme, because it's something we used to bang heads on over the years. You used to make some great points, and you would challenge me, and I would be like, yeah, you've got a point there. But ultimately, the agenda stumbles on regardless of who is going to bed in number 10. It doesn't matter. That's the reality of it. It's a horrible reality, and most people, I don't think, are aware of this. And I think when you try to suggest to people they might want to have a look at it, my approach is pretty, benign. It's a pretty easygoing approach. They can't countenance it. They can't comprehend the idea that it's all stitched up as you described it. But it is, T.
Well, look, I would say still use your vote. Don't expect too much from it. But there is all sorts of opportunities to use your vote. For example, for George Galloway's party, in some cases even the Green Party, what you're doing is you're eating away at the main party's votes, and you're sending a very clear message to them. We had the Rochdale by-election, didn't we, recently? And George Galloway's made an absolutely really important point there. I noticed Novara Media having a go at him. These so-called left, they don't like it, These so-called left-wing alternative media, they look more like gatekeepers to me. They're having a go at George Galloway, saying, oh, well, he's I think it's that they pointed out, Aaron Bastani's pointed out, oh, George thinks that being gay is not normal, so I could never vote for him. So hang on a minute,
it's
guys.
Not what he said.
You're trying to be.
It's not what he said. He didn't say. I saw the tweet. It's not what he said. Yeah, they misrepresented Galloway. But I'm going to, and I'm not going to get into, because I want to hear you. I don't want to be bantering with you. I just don't agree that, you can vote for a Green candidate or you can vote for a Workers' Party. It just doesn't make a blind bit of difference long term. Maybe locally, maybe. Some mutual friends of ours, they think that local politics is a way to make a difference because you can get in and you can disrupt. It's easier to get into a local authority and to disrupt some of their crazy climate plans and whatnot. But I think, I really do believe, T, that the architects of the agendas, which we have so many names for, they just don't care, mate, who wins it in the end, the election, because,
It does, no, but I think it definitely makes a difference. I'm pushing back against this because, for example, we've got to know over the years doing this local politics program in Bristol, some of the politicians, they do deserve my vote. Some of them, actually one of the guys is a particular guy, Tim Kent, was a Lib Dem, and he did a fantastic job as a Lib Dem. Now, I'm not saying I'm supporting his party particularly.
No, I know that.
But he got together with some lawyers, and they took the council to court over the special educational needs, and they beat them in court, and they forced the council to make sure that these disabled kids were educated properly. So there are some councils who are battling away out there. I think it's probably true to say. That's not the only example. I think, isn't it Ian Black over in Cambridge I was talking to recently? They got some councillor elected, a Tory elected in Cambridge for the first time for ages, who managed to get their ULEZ or whatever it was. I think actually it was a congestion zone completely stopped.
Yeah.
It never happened.
Can I give you a quick?
Yes.
Can I give you a quick retort, and then you get the final word on this, and then we'll talk about property rights. So I'm going to retort. You get the final word as always. Look, locally and constituently, there's no such term as constituently, what you're saying I can't disagree with. Of course, constituency politicians do sometimes manage to get things done which benefit people in their local communities. And you've highlighted a couple of very good examples there. But largely, and don't jump in just yet, give me 20 seconds and then you can jump in. They'll go to Westminster and they will swear a blood oath to Charles and all of his heirs. And when they get there, they're not exactly, apart from Andrew Bridgen, who came up on tonight's programme. They're not exactly screaming from the rooftops about what the damage the jabs are doing, are they? They're not screaming from the rooftops about the pandemic treaty. This is the point I'm making to you. Anyway, final word on this to you, and then we'll move on.
Well, I just don't think you can expect to elect somebody that agrees with you on everything. And also, there are some people you would vote for on some issues and some on other issues. But I'd say absolutely always use your vote. But also, quite understandable. We had a 14% turnout in one of the poorest areas in Bristol in these recent local elections a couple of weeks ago. 14%. And this is partly because of this scam voter ID brought in from America, where you've got to have some sort of photo ID, even if you are who they say you are, and you walk in to do your vote. If you haven't got some ID proving who you are, now you're not allowed to vote anymore. Now, this is part of the zero trust agenda that Sandy Adams talks about and other people. The idea is that you're guilty until proven innocent. This is a disgusting way to run a country. It's a very authoritarian way. So that's one reason why the turnout is so low. People may have bothered to vote and then found that someone's telling them that they don't believe they are who they are. And they need some kind of microchip to prove who they are, this sort of thing. But the other reason is that they're actually rather switched on, like you, Richie. They don't bother voting because they know it doesn't really make much difference, if any difference. And I was chatting to the Labour councillor there, and she said she'd got no help whatsoever from the Labour Party because what's happened is the other parties, the Greens, the Lib Dems, whatever in Bristol, have acknowledged that they're not going to bother trying to fight that. So she's just left there on her own. Literally a single mum, dragging her kids around, doing a little bit of campaigning, but they've completely given up on her because they think, it's an easy vote, let's just let her get on with it. And they don't really care. This is to be honest with you. And so that's why the turnout down there is so low. And what we did have a high turnout for is the Brexit vote. Massive turnout. The biggest turnout since the 1979 was one of the biggest turnouts since 2016 Brexit.
First,
because people felt that it was actually going to do something. Of course, many would argue it didn't. But the point is that people are saying they want to be able to get rid of governments they don't want, and largely voting has become that. Try and get rid of this person because they're awful, rather than voting for someone you do like, because the people that you do like have been character assassinated down the line and pushed out of politics.
Final word on this goes to Faisal, who agrees with you. Faisal says, at last somebody has said it. It's much better voting for any other than the main parties, just to cycle the nobbled politicians, to recycle them, instead of not voting, which does nothing. Faisal agrees. You're listening to Tony Gosling, great journalist, great writer. And Tony presents not the BCFM Politics Show every Friday at 5 o'clock. It really is a must listen. Now, when governments introduce things like, or say they want to scrap no-fault evictions, as somebody who for years rented and, was at the mercy of a landlord or a landlady who might just want to, even though I'm paying the rent and looking after the house, they might want to kick me out someday without giving me any good reason for it, or give me a short notice period. I like the idea of banning no-fault evictions, but as usual, it's a far more complex issue than I've given real thought to. You're really interested in it. Why? What's going on with this no-fault eviction stuff?
Well, look, I've been a land rights campaigner for many, many years, actually, probably since, before the Bilderberg stuff, really. I was doing this work, if you can believe it, with George Monbiot back in Oxford in 1975. And he started this thing called land reform, which I then became the office manager for. He managed to raise some money to pay expenses, but I was a volunteer in Oxford doing this. And we organised these great fun mass trespasses and occupations of land. And this is a tradition in Britain that we've had, not just in Ireland, in Britain, in England too, believe it or not.
Tell me why, T. Tell me why, T. Sorry, T. Tell me why. Why would anybody want to do that, to mass occupy land and take over a building? Why?
Well, I can give you a couple of examples. One was in 1999, we occupied St George's Hill for a couple of weeks in Surrey, which is like a private gated estate, and that is also the place where the diggers were in the Civil War. Now, this was a group of activists who, after the King was executed, King Charles I, they took over a piece of land in St. George's Hill in Surrey and just started, it's a bit of common land. And they said, well, okay, so now the king's dead, this was his land. Well, the common people can now have it. Now at last we can have some land. And they set up some little makeshift houses and started growing vegetables, planting in Easter 1649. There's a terrific song about it, actually. Leon Rosselson wrote, in 1649, on St. George's Hill, a ragged band they called the Diggers, I won't sing it, came to show the people's will. They defined the landlords, they defied the law, they were the dispossessed reclaiming what was theirs. And the principle really is that the land is, and the earth is a free gift to mankind, to everybody. And this is what the Diggers were saying. This is what I say, echoing down through history. And I believe it's totally unjust for anybody to be rooted out of somewhere, that everybody needs somewhere to live. We've got about 50 million acres of land in Britain, and yet most people have got none of it at all. Nothing. So let's just, share it all out as part of an investment. Now, and I know there was an enormous battle in Ireland over land, and the absentee landowners from England behaved appallingly, and the Irish fought back, and that's one of the reasons that we've now got the Irish Republic. Our
listeners might remember when Tony was on last, we discussed this. We discussed the Land League and Charles Stewart Parnell. The boy knows his history. Yeah, it's very good tea. Yeah. Yeah. Would you like to see that? Would you like to see that happen here? Would you like to see it catch on? People say, you know what? There's 50 million acres of land here. I'm going to have these couple of acres. I'm going to build myself a house. I mean, I don't know how far they'd get, but I'm very sympathetic to this idea, to be honest. Very sympathetic to it.
Well, look, so we started, I've been working with Kevin Carhill, who also, he's the author of several books, Who Owns the World, would you believe? He also has just come out with Who Owns Ireland, and probably, I think it was 2005 roughly, he published Who Owns Britain. And these are gazetteers of, each county by county in the UK, that last book, which you can see who's owned it over the centuries and who the main landowners are now. Because this is kind of hidden knowledge, really. And Kevin was working for the Rich List on the Sunday Times on people's land holdings, because the wealthy often hide their wealth in land. And so I was chatting with Kevin about this, and he and I were totally agreed. The most important thing in the world when it comes to land is security of tenure. So the idea that nobody can evict you. And we're now getting further and further away from this as these private equity firms and banks start to foreclose on loans, as the house prices start to fall, as people start to get into private equity, as they are now doing. You're just going to get more. And what's been happening is because more and more buy-to-let landlords are finding it impossible to pay their mortgages from the rents. They're trying to evict people. They're trying to up the rents. And people just can't pay it. And so a lot of them are going to the wall. A lot of people are getting evicted. A lot of those houses are being repossessed by the banks. And so I think, why don't we just say, make eviction, that's what the campaign is that Kevin and I have agreed on and are now sort of getting out there, is the campaign to abolish eviction. So everybody who is somewhere can stay there, and they've got no fear of being hoofed out. Now, this would include small businesses. I think this is a way of, fighting back against this attempt of private equity firms, Klaus Schwab and his mates, to literally buy up everything. Because as the economy starts to, people got less spending power, everything becomes more monopolized by the World Economic Forum types. We just say, no, we're not moving. And if we all was to say it together, now I realise there's a bit pie in the sky. I think the most important thing is to get people thinking and talking about eviction, because for a lot of people, it's a worry in the back of their mind they don't like to think about. And so let's bring it out into the front and say, well, actually, there's millions like you who are also saying, why the hell should I be afraid of being evicted and therefore work for some boss that I can't bear and I don't agree with? To me, it's a way of sending a message to the powerful financial elites that we're not having it anymore.
I love it, yeah. When I first got into doing this type of program in Spain years ago, I used to talk to Steve Keen, the economist, and others, and we would talk about these things. We would talk about how after every financial crash, now Steve Keen, I don't think believed that the crashes were deliberately orchestrated, but I did and I do, and I think we might have some common ground there. but that ultimately every time there's a manufactured crash, property and real wealth, which is land, goes concentrated in the hands of a tiny few people over and over. And what you just said there is so powerful and it's so scary. Every now and then I'll read an article, T, in one of the broadsheets or maybe one of the tabloids that talks about how so many people have only got a few grand in the bank as savings, meaning that if it goes really south for them in terms of their employment, they've really only got a couple of months before they're on the street. And you're right, I don't think of it often enough. There are a lot of people, I used to live with that fear. Things were very difficult for us financially in Spain, and when we first got back to the UK, we were in dire straits. It's a terrible pressure, a terrible stress. And you think, I'm going to ask you your opinion on this. I mean, when a bank signs, as a bank signed with me back in 2019, when a bank signs a mortgage agreement, it's committing fraud, isn't it, the minute it signs it? The instant it signs it, it's committing a fraud, the bank. Well, it is on a number of levels.
In which case, when you sign it, you are too, surely.
Yes, of course, 100%. Oh, I would acknowledge that. If you know, it is a fraud, yeah, because the bank, first of all, the bank is taking no risk whatsoever. It's an implied risk, which is not based in reality. It isn't lending you any money, it's creating new money out of thin air.
Yeah.
And it's a complete fraud. Like the idea that the bank would have a loss. You know, if we were to default, now we're lucky we had a very small mortgage and it's basically gone, right? But if we were to default, Halifax Bank would take this house from us, from Salford, and they would imply that they had lost something. They haven't lost anything, they've just created money. But anyway, that's a long-winded nonsense. But I do agree with you. It should be a human right. Every man, woman and child should have the right to have their own freeholding. Absolutely.
Well, do you know what? It is a human right in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the right to shelter. And as Kevin points out, if anyone wants to read Kevin's, I think the thing that kind of got me fired up about this last week was just Kevin had written this article specifically for the campaign, and he starts off by talking about Gaza, and of course this is absolutely current. We're looking at what our system is doing, the support for the genocide over there. And if you go to the website is tlio.org, maybe we can share a link afterwards. TLIO, the land is ours, tlio.org.uk/eviction. And reading through that article, you just you get a sense of history, you get a sense of the economics of what's effectively happening is what's happening even in my lifetime. We saw, for example, in the 1970s, I used to work with a woman called Stella who'd been a director of housing in Bristol of some aspect to do with council house building. And she said she left the job. I said, well, why did you leave? She said, well, we built enough houses. Everyone was housed. And you think, wow, you couldn't really say that today. But that was the situation back there. And now what's happened is all of the economic activity, it seems, in Britain, most of it seems to be not all of it, but most of it seems to be preying on our basic needs. These are our human rights, our right to water, exploiting massively overcharging people for basic stuff like water. We had our Bristol Water prosecuted, or there was an attempt to prosecute them. They won. Were trying to say they needed to build this massive new plant which was going to cost a fortune and double the bills. No, actually, they didn't quite get away with it, but they nearly did. So these companies are now trying to do everything they can because they're preying on our basic needs. They're preying on things like water, transport, telecoms, the railways. Obviously, that's transport. But look, all these basic things, electricity, power. What they're now doing, Richie, including food, as we now know, mainly through the supermarkets and the big food, is they are price fixing. They're price fixing fuel. They're price fixing food because they have a monopoly in these areas. So that is where all of the big money is coming from. It's become from dominating and monopolizing industries with oligopolies. And as you all know, many of these private equity firms own all of the different, say, supermarkets, petrol stations or whatever, airlines. You've got no real, choice. Actually, what you're doing is you're going to one BlackRock company or another BlackRock company. And so that's where the big money is, in these monopolized industries, which they're now just jacking up the price of everything to try and basically bankrupt us all. And the threat of people not being evicted, or the threat of evicting people, is almost at the heart of this, So that's why we focused on it, and that's why I decided to bite the bullet. I'm not expecting a great revolution, a great new law to be passed when Labour get in, saying we're going to make evictions all illegal. But I just think people need to be thinking and talking in these kinds of ways, and also protecting their friends and people in their neighbourhoods who are under threat of eviction.
Yeah, you're starting the conversation, mate, which is no bad thing. Couple of comments on it. Claire in Leitrim, in Ireland, friend of the program's, lovely idea. T. She's now going back to the no fault evictions have to be stopped. So she's talking about that. She says, we all know it won't be large landlord companies going belly up. It'll be the mom and pop landlords that maybe bought a second property as an investment. She's got a good point there. The people.
Yeah, but people don't. It doesn't matter really. I mean, obviously, it'd be nice to see the big banks suffer, but people don't need 3 or 4 properties. They need a property. If you've decided to plump for investing in something which is somebody else's home, and you're going to evict them because they're not paying you enough, then I'm afraid you're going to lose it. I think you should lose it. I don't think this is an ethical way to make a living. Yes, I can see there are some very good landlords out there, some that do actually bust a gut to look after their places. But I would much rather see people have security of tenure and the guarantee that, for example, they can stand up to their boss, they can tell them what they think, and they're not going to be hoofed out of their home in 2 or 3 weeks' time.
By the way, I do not own a second property. We barely, just about skin of our teeth, own this property, but I don't own anything else so everything is above board. I disagree with you saying it's unethical. I think Claire makes a good point when she says, you work bloody hard and you might be a third of the way through your mortgage and, you got kids and you have college and all of that. Look, why shouldn't I buy a property? And why shouldn't I? I mean, the council does it. The council owns properties and it charges people rent. So why shouldn't I do that? It's only one property. You're hardly Donald Trump or J.D. Rockefeller, And to be honest, when I think back to my experiences over the years, we rented from a guy in Fallowfield for just over 5 years, and the guy was an absolute diamond. He was a diamond of a landlord. And we were lucky to know him because there were times when we struggled and he knew, and he'd say, right, he said, give me what you want. And he never said, tack it on. He never said that. He said, look, we'll reduce it for the next 2 or 3 months. So there are some good people out there. And I don't think we should say they're unethical. What do you think? They're just making a living, honestly.
Look, I mean, if you go back to, say, the 1950s, right, then you would find the housing market was it cost to buy a house, roughly what it cost to build a house. Now, you've got a massive property bubble out there, Richie, which has become the place to invest your money. So I just think we've got to do something to burst it. We've got to do something about it. Obviously, it would be nice to, thinking and talking this through, not to go for small landlords who are, looking after their tenants in a decent fashion, are not trying to hoof them out so they can get an extra £10 a week rent from somebody else.
Yeah.
But the thing is, how do you've got to do something about this situation because it's becoming the core and the centre of our economy. Also, the World Economic Forum and their plans are so that when you can't and can no longer pay your mortgage, they will take the house and you'll just simply be paying rent to them. You will buy nothing. You'll own nothing, and you'll be happy. So you won't own a car. You'll be renting a car or hiring the car. You'll be renting your house, which is what they do a lot on the continent. And this idea that you actually own your own home, to me, it's quite important. I don't, but I can see why people can see that gives them the security that they need, and why not? That's, to me, though, security of tenure is absolutely key and crucial to just getting out of this obsession with the property owning classes, and that becoming one of the central things the Tories are actually supposed to be
the main party for this, but they've been taking all sorts of measures to make it difficult for the buy-to-let landlords. So, you do wonder. This is something coming down from the top, from the WEF, etc., to just try and make sure that people aren't allowed to own their own homes.
There's another aspect to this, which I must mention. By the way, before I do, thisweek.org.uk, Bilderberg.org, these are the websites. Tony Gosling and a crew, Martin and others, Fridays at 5. It's excellent. It really is. 3 hours of great radio. There's nothing like it. Check it out if you haven't before. Not to depress our listeners now, but there are other ways they plan to come for our properties. And one of the ways they want to come for our properties, and I was put onto this by a lawyer. I think you might know him. Robert, a British lawyer who's based in Hong Kong. They're going to come after the energy performance certificates. They're going to devalue houses, aren't they? They're going to declare houses are worthless. They're going to declare houses irredeemable. They're going to say you're never going to get that energy efficient. Particularly the housing stock in the UK that is over 50, 60 years old. This energy performance certificate. Watch this one closely, T. In the next few years.
I agree. And they're using a lot of this green agenda to so-called green agenda, pro-nuclear Greens. I mean, what a laugh. So they're using a lot of this to really impinge on the poorer people, particularly, but also, of course, for example, in a lot of the cities now, we've got these clean air zones where people with older cars have to pay to even drive out of their front door. This is beyond a joke, where someone down the road with their Chelsea tractor, if they have those two sort of different properties in the same street, they're paying nothing. And there is the green agenda is obviously quite obvious to me anyway, being used as a way to it's just tolls and taxes on poorer people, and of course this is the sort of thing that with Starmer, it's not as if the Labour Party are going to make any difference. They're all signed up to this stuff too.
Which is why I said earlier, I'm only joking, I'm not going to say it again. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, we spoke off here today. John McTernan told Sky News last week, after the local election results were pouring in, he said it's full speed ahead with the transfer to the Green agenda. That's going to be his utmost priority. And if he's got to use one or two Greens and a few SNPs to make up the numbers after the election, well, it's a no-brainer where it's going to go. We've got about 6 minutes left with Tony. Do you want to talk a minute about what's happening in Rafah? I'm beginning to hope that this is coming to some end. I know.
I don't know.
What do you think?
Have you mentioned Eurovision? Have you mentioned this?
Yeah, we've been talking about it. Yeah, on the show. It's crazy stuff, isn't it?
Because did you see the Irish? Have you been talking about the Irish demonic Irish thing?
Bambi Thug, yeah.
And they're the people who are supposed to be standing up against the demonic Israelis. This is a theatre, and it's so vile. But anyway, yeah, Rafah. I noticed yesterday, by the way, I was Saturday, looking at the Biden story, and I tweeted about this too, that MSN, that is to say on Bing and DuckDuckGo, was blocking all access to those stories. So they say you can look at it on MSN, but then you click on the MSN, it says, sorry, the story's not available. So then they're blocking all the stories about the Biden talking about stopping arms sales to Israel if they go into Rafah. You just weren't allowed to read it if you're looking at through those search engines on the news sites. So this is Bilderberg territory, right? This is exactly who they are and what they do, because they're big controllers of social media. Peter Thiel will be there in Madrid at the end of the month. It's the 30th of May. I think they're also starting early this year. They're starting on the Tuesday and finishing on the Sunday, so they've got an extra day. And that, I would guess, is because Kissinger's dead now, and he was the main guy really before, but now I guess it's people like Peter Thiel, and they think if they're going to fly across the world for this get-together, then they'd like a bit more time to get their story straight, these criminals on their next war. But obviously the Rafah business and the Israelis and the Gaza genocide is just it's satanic. That's what my neighbours say. I'm not just talking about Muslim neighbours either. This is so evil. Yeah, it's satanic.
So what you've got there is this kind of Gnostic view, which is that the end of the accelerationist view, where the Zionists, what they're trying to do is to accelerate the end of the world. And if they can have the biggest war that the world has ever seen, then that for them is a positive thing, because they can then bring some sort of change out of it. I think there's also a massive depopulation agenda. They want to get rid of lots of the world's population, which they could do so in a world war. And a lot of people will think, well, who wants a world war? They don't really want that. That's all just a psychological thing. I think they really do. They really want to, they've spent a lot of time thinking about how can we have a massive war to kill as many people as possible. Well, why don't we do it in the Middle East? We get the Americans and the Chinese to really fight each other, maybe the Russians too. And it will be even bigger than World War II. And I think that's what they're up to.
Finally on this, and we'll leave it then for today, I'm reliably informed by my listeners that Dr. Ahmad Malik, who's a pretty decent bloke, orthopaedic surgeon, interviewed Andrew Bridgen. I don't think this means anything, really. Bridgen said to Ahmad that the UK is effectively at war with Russia, that Sunak knows this, and that sometime around the summer there's going to be some announcement around this, that the UK is going to announce, or the UK government, I should say, acknowledge or admit that the UK is at war with Russia. Would something like that be meaningful? Or is it just ridiculous? Because if you're giving weapons to Ukraine, money, tactical advice or whatnot, well, you are effectively in the war. So does it matter what Bridgen said?
Well, he's right. We are at war with Russia. It's really an undeclared war. But this is where it all comes back to the Bilderbergers. These people are controlling the politics in the Western world, as I explained earlier. And if you would look at my book, as some of your listeners have done after these shows, I get some orders in through eBay for Traitors of Arnhem.
Delighted.
You will find that at the end of the Second World War, I mean, we know quite a lot about Operation Paperclip and a lot of Nazi scientists and SS expertise going to the US and then being integrated into the CIA when that was created. You've got this arrangement between Winston Churchill's private secretary, Desmond Morton, who employed Ian Fleming and various others to go to Berlin at the end of the Second World War and to safely, with commandos along the rivers, bring out Hitler's private secretary, Martin Bormann. But Bormann had the signatories on the bank account of all the loot of Nazi Germany. That's all the money that they'd taken from all the countries that they'd occupied. And that money was then taken over to South America and through the Dulles Brothers law firm, Sullivan and Cromwell, laundered into the 750 companies that Bormann created. And those companies, many of them had Jewish people put in as chairman to disguise the fact that it was a Nazi-funded company. So this is the Fourth Reich I think we've been dealing with ever since the Second World War. And so that is, and the Russians are quite right looking at the West now and saying, hang on a minute, guys, we've been here before. And I don't know if you noticed in this, in Red Square last weekend, they had an amazing, some fantastic pictures actually of the Muscovites looking at all the NATO hardware that the Russian army have captured in the east of Ukraine. And so they had a kind of a parade of it, actually, which is all there as an exhibition. But in the background to the exhibition, what you've got is loads of blown up black and white pictures of the same thing in 1944. They did exactly the same thing with the Nazi tanks that they captured as the Russian army was propelling its way towards Berlin, the Red Army. They had an exhibition in 1944 in Red Square in Moscow so that all the mums and the kids could come and have a look at all the prizes that they've been winning in all these battles fighting to Berlin. So the Russians understand exactly what they're dealing with. The question is, Richie, do we?
Question is, do we? Thisweek.org.uk, Bilderberg.org, Tony on Friday at 5 o'clock with a cast of terrific speakers and researchers. The Traders of Arnhem, get it at eBay, get it, I'll put a link, I'll find it on eBay and I'll put a link on the podcast notes. That's all we have time for. Great having you back today. Cheers, pal. I look forward to the next time.
I want to say one thing, Richie, very quickly.
Go ahead,
really,
quick as you can.
I squeeze one thing in?
30 seconds.
Dirty Bomb by Roger Cook. I don't know if we've spoken about this. That's back up on the internet. It's been lost for 30 years. It's a Cook report which talks about him being offered SS-20 missile, and they proved it actually was weapons-grade plutonium in Russia back in 1993, because the army hadn't been paid. They were looking at ways of making a few bob. So if Roger Cook, and it's a brilliant program to watch, it's only half an hour, but it's back again. Someone's rediscovered it after being lost for 30 years. You will see that it's quite feasible that there are nuclear weapons out there that have been sold by the Soviets in the 90s on the black market. So keep an eye open for a nuclear false flag. It could be one of those that was not bought by Roger Cook. But, if Roger Cook can buy it, so why not any other country?
Why not anybody else? On that bombshell, no pun intended. I will look for that. I've never seen that. I remember you talking about it before, yeah. Cheers, T. Thanks again. Speak real soon. Tony Gosling, terrific writer, broadcaster, an all-round good guy on Monday's Richie Allen Show. That's about all I've got time for. Thank you for the messages that came in during the programme. I really appreciate them. Back with you tomorrow, Tuesday, same time, 4 o'clock. But before that, as you're well aware, I will be bringing you the Papers podcast. It generally arrives online about 7:30 a.m. or shortly before 7:30. Thank you so much to Kate Deeming earlier on from the Scottish Union for Education. Really, really interesting and important conversation. Thank you, Kate. You can follow Kate on Twitter. She's at Sunrise Dances. At Sunrise Dances on Twitter. Do give her a follow there. And she's got her own Substack, which is deemingdreaming.substack.com. I'll put that link on the podcast notes.